Today, we're talking about something we don't talk about enough, the difference between wanting to be at peace and actually training for it. We've gotten so good at hoping we'll say the right thing, hoping we'll stay calm, hoping we'll rise to the moment when it actually counts. But hoping keeps us unprepared. It keeps us frozen, keeps us surprised by our own reactions over and over right when it matters most. Practice is different. Practice is what actually gets us ready. It's what turns a good intention into something we can actually do under pressure in real time. So today we're sitting with the thread, what it might mean to actually train for peace, not perform it, not just intend it, just train for it, the same way people before us did, and what that could look like for the rest of us. So welcome to White Women Wake Up. I'm Karen.
And I'm Jonelle.
Each week, one of us brings a topic to the table, something we've been wrestling with, reading about, or noticing in our own lives.
And the other reacts in real time. No scripts, no prep, just honest conversation between a mother and daughter spanning generations about what it means to wake up as white women in a world shaped by bias, power, and inherited patterns.
It's not always easy. We don't always agree, but we show up anyway.
Yes, we do.
Let's wake up.
Let's wake up.
Hey, Jonelle, how are you?
Hello, Karen.
Announcement. We have to remember our book club is coming up August 11th. Please sign up. You will want to go under our website. Welcome to White Women. No, not welcome. Sorry. whitewomenwakeup.com. And you'll see a link that says banned book clubs. Please register.
Yes, all of the banned books are up there too for the year. I've started reading two, I think like a December one and like a based on whatever the library could get me. So I'm going very out of order, but yeah, the books are there ready for everyone. Becky has picked out some phenomenal books for us. And it's really exciting.
It is. It's a great place for, speaking of our conversation today, it is a way to practice. Other things, reflection. I really, Janelle, I'm so glad you talked about this because I narrowed it down to this language of how propaganda often dehumanizes people, especially people on the margins. And so I just simply really paid attention to when did the news discount someone? When did the news use a language that was sensational? When, I consume more TV than I probably should. And so I thought about that a lot, like when characters were side roles.
Yeah.
And they were dismissed. And so anyways, it's awareness, right? I'm glad you brought the topic up because it made me aware this week of how often that those little subtleties show up everywhere.
And I appreciate you, like, at the beginning of last week, you were like, well, you're kind of on a couple different paths. So I do appreciate after thinking about it, you understood where I was going. And hopefully the audience did too.
Yeah.
But what I kept reflecting on this week around propaganda, and this is not a hard and fast rule, but this is what I've noticed more intentionally, is when it's propaganda, it's loud. It is like overtly in your face. When it is more about the truth, I feel like it's subtle. And I feel like and so it is listening to things like, again, this documentary I went back to is, I went in for a true crime documentary. And then as I was like Googling things, because of course I'm like, they're in a conservative town. I wonder what this teacher's like political stuff is, and I was kind of describing some of the stuff to like AI about the documentary, like that I was seeing. And the documentary was like, you exactly picked up on the subtleties that they wanted you to. It wasn't overtly about the kid's experience and how, putting a story and a name and a face to these high-risk victims also empowered these kids in tough home environments. Like, that wasn't overtly what it said it was about, but that was the subtlety of what they wanted you to get out of it. And so I thought that was really interesting as opposed to some of the propaganda that's so overt of like, you know, criminal immigrants are taking over or like
Yeah.
which is not true as we know. And so it's like where are we also missing subtle messages of humanity that we're supposed to be taking in as well. Like, so that's kind of what I was, like, reflecting on too. It's like, yeah, where's the propaganda shifting our perspective? And it's not even, like, as we talked about last week, current propaganda. Because I think right now, currently, a lot of people are really doing a good job of dissecting what is coming at them in the current moment because we know it's happening. But it's where's the propaganda that has built up your rhetoric, your perspective decades before we understood this type of propaganda and stuff,
Yeah.
versus then also where are the subtleties in humanity that you might be missing because we're just looking for fear or like big headlines. So that's
Yeah.
kind of like what I was thinking about
One
this
thing
week on
I'd
it.
heard that the conversations can actually begin to happen is when the humanness when we can relate to the humanness. So, for example, I live in a place our cabin is in a place where there's wildfires, and there was a recent wildfire, and one of our friends lost his home. And, so this friend, where do you stay? What do you do? How do you pick up the pieces? And I was able to have a conversation with one of my conservative friends about climate migration. And right now, we're in a serious, a lot of our migrant population. So when we look at the language of migrant population, it's someone who doesn't have a passport.
Yeah.
And so there's a beautiful documentary called Flow by Ai Weiwei, the artist. And, anyways, climate population, climate migration is people who have to leave their countries because of climate change, whether it is fires, hurricanes, tornadoes, any of that. This conservative friend was actually, because we just had this wildfire, because friends' homes were destroyed, because they didn't have a place to live, when I talked about climate migration, he actually heard me
Yeah.
there wasn't propaganda, there wasn't loud slogans. It was simply, this is what is existing because we're not putting policies in place that benefit our climate right now, and we're all living the result of that. So, anyways, the
Yes.
human connection of how when people are in the midst of something, often that is a place. You don't I we didn't preach it. I just said, "Yeah, this is real. Climate
Yeah.
migration is real." Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I love that you were able again, like you said, it's the connection of, like, connecting it to our own stories and, like, we're a broken record here, but I'm gonna keep saying it. This is why reading is so important
Yes.
because they say, like, you can't experience everything physically in your life, but when you read, there is that, like, insertion of yourself in this world.
Yeah.
And so reading builds empathy from a young age to an old age, anything where you are. But I love that you were able to have that conversation. I mean, it's sad for the
Oh, yes.
story and
Yeah,
what
but it but it
what we're
but
experiencing, but
but
it's
when we have that human connection, each of us, we can hear
yes,
things differently. Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Love that. Okay,
Okay,
on to your topic. I'm
I
excited.
okay, I have to say, my topic is brought on. You know how we always laugh about how it comes on by these kind of odd little connections.
Totally. But we
2
see it at the
connect
beginning. It's like
Yeah,
what we're thinking about, we're hoping that these are things that cross our listeners' minds too
yeah.
throughout the week of like this is something they recognize. I mean, this is where our I think vulnerability and authenticity is like we saw this, we then explored it, and let's talk about it.
Yeah. So I came home from an outing
Okay.
and my sister asked how this outing was, and I proceeded to kind of talk derogatory about someone.
Oh.
And I walked away feeling like this is not who I want to be. I don't like this in myself. I don't want to be someone that here's how I was able to categorize this in my own mind. I didn't talk about the situation in the way that helped reflect on my own personal growth.
Mm,
I diminished the other person. And
yeah.
so a day later, I asked my sister, "Can I re-enter the room and role play with you what that would have looked like if you'd asked me the question and I answered it differently?"
Oh my gosh, I love this.
And we did, and I was able to practice a language that wouldn't typically be me, but the way that I want to grow, where I wanna go with who I am as a human being.
Oh my gosh,
So
I love
so that
this.
was kinda interesting, and she actually really loved it too.
Yeah,
It
I
was
can
really
see.
interesting for both of us. At the same time, I was you and I, we watch documentaries or whatever. Yeah, I don't remember where I heard this, but I heard this thing about Rosa Park, and Rosa Park had actually had nonviolent training before she actually decided to stay on the bus. And so she had this nonviolent training. Let me get the name of this. It was called the Highlander Folk School in Tennessee. And it was interesting because it was done by a woman named Septima Clark. We've actually featured her before. Septima she was an educator. She was actually fired from her teaching job because she was an NAACP member. She's a Black woman, she was a member, and they fired her. So, she actually was, instrumental in training Martin Luther King. She
Mm.
trained John Lewis. Maybe that's where I heard of her too recently when John Lewis passed. But a lot of these, early civil rights people, before they even engaged in civil rights, actually had this nonviolent training by Septima Clark at the Highlander Folk School. Same with Rosa Parks. So when Rosa Parks actually did decide to sit on the bus and stay there, it wasn't because she wasn't afraid. It wasn't because she was this incredible courageous
Yes.
woman. It's because she had practiced methods of nonviolence and of change, and
We must
so
have watched this documentary together because I also learned this recently, but I
yeah,
do not remember where I learned this from. So
yeah,
anyways, go on.
we must have. So anyways, it's just those 2 things were actually really interesting to me, like, if we're committed to peacemaking, with
Yes.
peacemaking within our own family structures, like, I have to have a conversation who's opposed to transgender bathrooms. Um, if I'm gonna have conversations with policymakers, how do I practice that? And so
Yes.
anyways, before I go on, do you have any examples of your own trainings? Or I know you've done a lot of executive trainings and so forth, but this idea of training or
It
learning with intention.
Well, and I think I love that, learning with intention, and it is so interesting in life because we do experience training all the time at work. No matter what level you're at, there's always some sort of training you're going to be
Yeah.
involved in, and yes, I've had much more, like, at the level that I was at, I had a lot more training around speaking, delivering messages. I
Yeah.
feel like I've lost a lot of it given where we go with the podcast. Everyone knows we're all over the place. But, or it was interesting, again, that podcast I mentioned last week, about the cousin of the Menendez brothers and how
Mhm.
when she was thrown in as, like, the family representative, they actually put her through media training
Mm.
because it's really important to, like, make sure, like, and you don't think about it, but the fact that there is, media training is offered talks about how it is an art to deal with the media, and so I think that's so interesting that you're talking about this, and yes, I heard the same thing about Rosa Parks wherever we heard it about how we and again, that's propaganda, how we view her as just like a
Oh, yeah.
sickly old lady who just randomly decided to sit down. But no, there was intention behind it. There was thought behind it. There was work and there was prep. And it wasn't just this. And I think the reason that that gets erased from history is because it says something that there was thought behind it that needed action, as opposed to this random occurrence, like, that it actually
Well,
was a
we as
movement.
our whiteness doesn't want us to believe that Black people are intelligent and capable of creating systems of
Yeah.
transformation and
Well,
change.
yeah, I
And
also
it's
feel
more
like it's more like
comfortable for us to think she just willy-nilly did it.
yeah, I think it's also more kind of like they don't want us to think that, "Oh, there was an issue," until, "Oh, it was just pointed out randomly to us,"
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
"Oh."
Okay,
Anyways,
so
but go on.
so
So,
let me
no,
go
I
on.
love this
So
idea of intentional
yeah.
systems
But it's
of
interesting
learning.
because it's the statistics are interesting. So Mia Mingus, she does transformative justice work.
Yeah.
She says apologizing well is a skill, not a confession. So she has a four-part series, and I think this is nice because it's, change sometimes has to be digestible. So first, self-reflection. In my case, in my story, I walked away very uncomfortable with who I was, with what I did, with my
Mm.
actions. I was able to go and apologize. I didn't apologize to the person I transgressed because it didn't make sense,
Yeah.
but I apologized to the person I was having a conversation with.
Yeah.
And for me, the repair, and then she talks about self-reflection, apology, repair, then behavior change.
Oh, yes.
One thing I've learned and in my own walk in life is behavior change has to be learned, practiced, repeated.
Yes.
And so one thing, there's this 2025 study that says therapists who found the ones who rehearsed a skill through role play did significantly better. So
Uh-huh.
that's exciting. Here's the unexciting part.
Oh.
So, it says that children do it better than adults.
Oh, I believe that.
So,
100%.
one of the things that children are more able to do is they do repeat the role playing. Adults do the role playing once or twice,
Yeah.
but don't change the behavior. And the behavior only changes when you do it on a regular when you role play, like Rosa Park actually went to a training where
Yeah.
she to do it over and over and
Over and
over and
over.
over again. So, as adults
Well, and isn't that so interesting with kids too? Because that is what kids do is they play adult essentially. They
yes,
observe and then they play. And I heard a really interesting thing about, there's a great podcast I love called Pink Pilling. I've talked about this before where like essentially the wife brings up all of these like stereotypes around women and kind of and has her husband reflect on it. And one recently was about how why do we say that women don't have natural leadership skills when you watch little girls play, all they do is like assign roles
yeah,
and then make like, scenarios and then figure it out like no, you're this person and they engage in group dynamics. And so it's exactly kind of what you're talking about, these kids like who continue to role play and figure out the different roles and how that dynamic unfolds, and that's so
that's
interesting.
so true. We just went camping with this adorable four-year-old, and the whole time she said, "You're the kid.
Yeah.
Kid, you're the kid." I'm the doctor.
Yeah.
Next time she was the teacher, I was the kid.
Yeah.
But then
And
we
even as the
also went
doctor, she was like, she
yeah.
understood. She didn't see me because my insurance didn't work, and she pushed me out a couple weeks. And I was like, "What is this?
What is
What
this?
kind of
Anyways,
healthcare
that's so
system?"
interesting, but this role playing, so kids do it better.
Uh,
And so one of the things that, is interesting in doing the research, they were saying that is one of the ways why people are really upset when, TikTokers or influencers use words that were kind of racial they were derogative, and then they apologize and they want everything to be okay when in fact their behavior doesn't change, right?
But
There is
isn't that the white narrative in general? I feel like
yeah,
we see that a lot with going back to a couple weeks ago about guilt versus grief is
yeah,
like when you sit in the guilt or shame, you wanna just wipe it away.
you
And the
do,
thing is and
especially
ignore,
yeah,
and that is still almost so harmful to people that it's affected. So
yeah,
you're so
yeah,
right there.
instead of learning, actually learning,
Yes,
like
and
learning ways to
changing.
do this. And they do say the meta-analysis, 26 different studies found that role playing does significantly reduce racial prejudice. But right, which is really exciting because
Yep.
and maybe that's so weird because in some ways, maybe that's what this podcast started out with us, is you and I were
Role
able to
play.
start having these conversations that we agreed and disagreed, but as we started practicing, I remember the first time, and shows my whiteness, right? I couldn't even say, "Oh, that's a black friend of mine. That friend of mine is black." I had a hard time using the language of blackness, and
Yeah.
it's what? So anyways, but role playing. So
But that is such a great, so anyone who's listening to us who's just starting their journey, I think that is a great point to, like, wait, stop and reflect on, because you're right. We have practiced this already for years together,
yeah,
these conversations. And then now we're at a year and a half of doing a podcast, of really even more intentionally practicing these conversations. And so that is a good reflection point to listeners of, it is okay wherever you are on this journey. We are
yeah,
not expecting your conversations or your comfortability to feel smooth and right in your body. If that's not where you are, that's okay. It is about practicing. Like,
yeah.
it is,
And the
and maybe that is
practicing
it's a
will
good
make you
reminder to
uncomfortable.
everyone.
Yeah,
We practice this literally all the time, and you even hear how imperfect we are
yeah.
for the amount that we practice
Yeah,
this.
yeah. But boy, I think it's so worth it too, because like you said last podcast about these are subtle and nuanced conversations,
Yeah.
I can begin to recognize when my conversations like even this one with my sister, it was not okay. It was
Yeah.
not okay. It took away the humanity of the person I was talking about.
And isn't that
And
important too?
I'm gonna screw up the rest of my life. I mean,
Oh,
this is not about being perfect, but I love the idea of giving ourselves this opportunity. Okay,
but wait,
let me
can I
keep
finish on
going.
that too? Because isn't that's a really added point, that you were able to identify that, oh, this conversation felt off. Because I also think that's a big thing we've talked about. And this is the thing that where we say a lot of people of color are more fearful of white progressive people, is because white progressive people, because they feel like they know what's right, when they mess up, they either don't recognize that they've messed up, or two, there is shame and guilt in that messing up, so there's not identifying it.
Yeah.
Whereas you didn't
Oh,
have, you had grief. You didn't have shame or guilt. You had grief around the conversation of what could have been, and then you said, "Let's practice it again." So I do think that's also a really, like, key distinction to think about. So I'm loving this. I'm
okay.
also so jealous that you practice this with Aunt Linda, because this is what our podcast is, where we can't tell each other about this. That when you first described it, I was like, I can't believe no one told me about this.
That's so funny. Okay, second, here's another one. Um, this I love this woman, White Women Whisperer. She's on
Yes. I love her.
Yeah,
I've
so
been following her for years. She's the best.
she is amazing. Her name's Rebecca. She's an educator, and she has this acronym that I think is something that we as white women can walk away with and think about it. It's WAIT, WAIT, and it stands for Why Am I Talking?
Oh my
And
god.
so
How have I not heard her say that before? I love
I
that.
love that because I think that right there, if you wait, why am I talking? Like, you can spend time in your mind thinking, "What is the value of these words? Is it dehumanizing? Is it helping me grow? Is it putting someone down? Is it needed?"
Is it
So
also
I
needed? Is it also taking up space that
yeah,
when someone else should be have the space, have
yeah.
the forefront? Like, why am I putting myself in the center?
Yeah, yeah. So wait, why am I talking?
Love.
And she's a really good TikToker, white
She
women.
is amazing. White woman whisperer. I have followed her for
Yeah,
years. Please go follow her,
yeah,
everyone. She is
yeah.
so amazing.
So here's a controversy, okay? And I don't know, I don't have an answer for it. We're putting it out there so that maybe our listeners can respond. So one of the things that we talk a lot about is this language of appropriation, right? Are we taking someone else's tools and using them for our own,
Yeah.
it's going to help me in my relationship
Or
with
without giving credit
kind of
where
thing.
credit's due.
So one of the things that obviously, if you read John Lewis's book, if you read anyone on from the civil rights movement, as Septima Clark, any Rosa Park, is it appropriate for us to take these Kingian nonviolent training methods from the civil rights and use those methods in our own day to day?
Mm.
Now, I do know one thing that citations and credit is really important. So I know,
Yeah, I was about to
several
tell
several
me about
episodes
why.
let me finish.
Okay.
Several episodes, I had just gotten done reading John Lewis's book, which was beautiful, and I already forgot because I didn't role play or practice or take a test, but he had some really good steps, and his audience was not just, a Black audience, it was a general audience,
Yeah.
about peacemaking, and his book but I did credit him. So anyways, what are your thoughts about taking some of
Well,
these steps?
I think it's interesting because this is not necessarily where I define appropriation, but but again, I think it's dependent on how it's used. To
Yeah,
your point, I think there's like a term that my generation just calls like therapy speak or therapy talk, and it's where people really like weaponize therapy words. And
yeah,
so I think in that sense, anything that's like weaponized, anything that's taken out of context without credit in this situation, I think is obviously not positive. But this to me, and that's often what a lot of the appropriation is, to be
yeah,
fair. Like a lot of it is taking credit for rap music, taking
yeah,
credit,
yeah,
grades, all of that kind of stuff. And so that's I think where appropriation like falls into play with those. I would say this isn't, if done in the right way, like if you are taught through people of color experts, if you are, taught in those manners, I don't think that's appropriation then, because I would argue that these are things that they would want any anti-racist to practice,
yeah.
kind of thing. If
I
again, and so I'm curious where like
so where I this question about appropriating the, nonviolent, civil rights movement,
yeah.
where I landed is all about context. I haven't been sprayed by a fire hose.
Oh, yeah.
I haven't been thrown in a prison because
Totally.
I stood my ground against someone who was, you know, gosh. dehumanizing me. I'm not Emmett Till. I so what I think is fascinating is reminding myself, I'll use the I language, reminding myself that although these are really important because they're really important,
But
how
what
can
if
I
you are putting your situation that's what I guess what I'm saying is,
well,
like,
yeah, if you
yeah,
are put in this
like, I'm
like,
not gonna go to that training,
yeah.
but I guess this is where I'm curious is, do you
Well, I
think
don't know.
people do
I
that
just think
type of training if
yeah,
they're not gonna be in those type of situations?
yeah,
I guess that's
yeah.
more what I was.
Yeah, I guess I don't know. I thought the question was really interesting, and I
Yeah, yeah,
think
yeah.
it's worth, like, keeping in your mind. So as you hopefully, as we all do, go to nonviolence training and go to peacemaking training, because I think I went to a really great peacemaking policy training workshop, and I'll tell you who the workshop was led by
Yeah,
part of. Um, I didn't think about it at the time that what this training came from
yeah.
is a result of. And so maybe maybe that's just important to remind yourself of the histories of what this came from.
Because I would almost argue, especially in this day and age where we are seeing all of the ICE, like, these ICE kidnappings
Yeah,
happening, and especially in a state like Washington where, ICE is being much sneakier about it after everything happened in Minnesota, though, as we know, in the last couple weeks, there were
yeah,
still and so I would almost argue this is actually important to maybe go get listeners to find the right avenue to
yes,
be trained, but to be in order to be able to figure out how to peacefully protest, peacefully protect people who
yeah.
are being I mean, I think that's a really
Maybe
interesting.
it goes back to attribute it to. So if you're in a nonviolence training and they say this is, ask where some of these
Yeah.
these ideas came from, the
Or
idiom.
again, find
Do it.
trainers.
Okay. You know what? I'll give a good example.
Okay, great.
Whenever I teach Gestalt principles of visual
Mhm.
perception, I
Yeah.
always attribute the psychologists that came up with that theory.
Okay.
Got it? So
Yeah, well,
maybe
this is what
this
I'm
is
saying,
the
it's
same
about
thing.
finding the right teacher too, because the right
Yeah,
teacher is going to either be of that community, hopefully,
yeah,
or also give history to it.
yeah,
Oh my
yeah.
god, I now wanna really take one because, again, it's about preparedness
It's
for
about
these
preparedness. Okay,
situations.
let me give you a couple more details before we head out because
Add that on my
I
bingo
wanna head out.
card.
So, Regina Jackson, which you and I both read the
Love.
book,
Yeah,
White
yeah.
Women, she and her partner do, training to white women,
Yeah.
which she talks a
Wait,
lot about.
wait, you skid over that quickly, will you tell the listeners
Oh,
again the book
the
name?
book is
'Cause
White
that
Women,
was
and
such a
it's a
good book.
great book, and
Great
she
book.
she does these, gather
The It is not for the sensitive white woman.
no,
It is not even for the hardened white woman. It is a very explicit book, but it was so good.
expect
I
to be uncomfortable, and
Yes.
a good discomfort. So Regina
Yes.
Jackson, she co-wrote the book White Women. Um, she said you cannot even start extracting this white supremacy from your being until you extract the need to be perfect, the need to be uncomfortable, all the above. But that is one good book that's about training. The other group that, although it was started by a Palestinian man and a pastor. It's called the Telos group,
Okay.
and they started their peacemaking workshops specifically in the Israeli Palestinian
Mhm.
conflict.
Yeah.
But but they're rooted here in New York now, I believe, and they also do they call it the American South, retracing the civil history, uh,
Mm.
thing. It's a 10-day journey. It's in September, and I so
Oh
wanted to go to it,
god.
and it's my first week of school.
Oh,
So
that
but
would be
yeah,
so
an amazing one. But they have 6 principles that they, they do things like listen to understand, self-interrogation. Let me give you what they are. Growth, change is always possible. Equity, ownership, not just a seat at the table, but real foundation equality.
Yeah.
Justice, peace and justice can't be separated. Pursuing peace without justice is hollow. Relationships, real transformation happens through authentic,
Yeah.
non-transactional relationships. Nonviolence, active nonviolence grounded in love and hope resists all forms of violence. And mutual flourishing. I love
Love
that.
it. Love
The
it.
end goal isn't defeating an enemy, it's about transformation, and everyone is beloved. And so
Yes.
they have a whole system of going through the principles of peacemaking.
Amazing.
Um, yeah,
Um, will you make sure all of these links for people are in
I
the show
will.
notes? Because
Yeah.
I think these are so great to share with everyone. The book, the training,
Yeah.
I love all of that.
Um, so what I want us to do, so again, this rooted in the idea of playing, this
Yeah.
rooted in the idea of, yes, we will make mistakes, but we want to transform. We want to wait. Why am I talking? Um, so a couple things. One, things to think about this week. Listen to understand. Before responding in a hard conversation, ask yourself if you're actually trying to understand the other person or just
Yeah.
waiting for your turn to talk. Second, self interrogate before you defend. Next time you feel defensive, pause and ask what bias or assumption is driving this reaction. If you
Yeah.
need to write it down, if you need to journal, that's the internal practice. Telos has to come
Yeah.
before any external change.
I love
So,
this. Oh my gosh. What a great topic. Thank you. Really good. I loved this.
so thank you. We're gonna exit.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you everyone for
Thanks for
listening.
thanks for joining us on White Women Wake Up. We hope today's conversation sparks something in you, whether it's reflection, a new question, or deeper commitment to showing up with empathy and accountability. If you found this episode meaningful, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. You can also connect with us on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Substack, or at whitewomenwakeup.com. We'd love to hear your thoughts and keep this conversation going. Until next time, stay curious, be open, and let's keep waking up together. Before you go, a playback on where today's research came from. The Rosa Parks history comes from the Stanford King Institute and the Rosa Parks Biography Archive. She trained 2 weeks at Highlander Folk School under Septima Clark months before the boycott. The re-entering the room framework traces back to Mia Mingus' 4 parts of accountability on her blog, Leaving Evidence. The science on rehearsal building real skill faster than talk alone comes from a 2025 randomized trial on behavior research and therapy. The modern nonviolence tradition comes from Kazuo Hagau's Healing Resistance and the Kingian nonviolence curriculum. And if you want somewhere to practice this yourself, check out the Telos Group's Principles and Practices of Peacemaking, free and linked in our show notes. Thank you for joining us today on White Women Wake Up. Until next time, be open and let's keep waking up.
Keep waking up.
Bye.
Bye.